One is the truly iconic horror piece featuring the great Bela Lugosi. The other is a sequel, if you can believe it, with Nick Cage instead of Bela Lugosi. See how this goes. Dracula. They Remade It. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of They Remade It. I'm your host, Stuart.
And I'm your host, Jacob.
And welcome once again to our annual horror season, or, at least horror adjacent, and as the case may be.
Boo, bleh, and so on.
Oh, I'm so scared, my heart, etc. But, with that finally comes the slow but steady ingress of the fall weather, as I must open with the weather each time. But you know what? This time I'm ecstatic about it, because, dear God, it's not 90 degrees every day now. It's only 85 degrees.
Bring on the cool.
I'm genuinely so thrilled about it. I've been so tired of just sweating my ass off all the time, and it's just like, it's the small things. It's just when you live in a swampy state like I do, it's the small things like that.
I truly sympathize.
Oh. I'm guessing it's getting better up there as well.
I mean, thankfully it's been better for a while. The last truly muggy hot day was quite a bit ago, thankfully. My only problem is that, like, with spring and fall, it never really stays this way. It's like, This is relatively nice. It's going to be freezing in 2 weeks, probably, so.
Which, for me, I love that. I've always been a cold person. Which, it's not going to be freezing here until at least December. I have no belief otherwise.
Yeah. No, you got that going for you.
Oh, well. But enough of my generic opener that I use every time now, because, I mean, what else am I going to open with? Let's do our second opener and check what you've been watching. Or consuming, I guess I should say.
What you've been... Yeah. That.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Well... a couple things. Nothing too huge, really. Well, that's funny because some of them are relatively big, but, nothing big for me, nothing I was too excited for, I guess. I saw a handful of things that I hadn't seen before that I was sitting down to watch, like Inland Empire, which was like David Lynch's last directorial feature. I finally got a chance to watch. I'd been putting it off because it's like 3 hours long. As expected, very strange and surreal, and it might be his most indecipherable movie up to this point.
That's fascinating.
It's very confusing on a level that I haven't seen even from him. So that was a treat. I
do love when artists, in one form or another, just do that whenever they get to their older age, where they've truly found that point of, like, just doing their shit. That's so much their shit that it's near indecipherable. Like, the same happened with Picasso. Like, if you see some of his latest works, obviously there's some of his earlier, more famous pieces that are just kind of, jumbled and, like, kind of multi-perspective kind of artwork. But then you get to the end, and it's like a person's face looks like a stained glass window. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I honestly prefer his later work.
Just, wait for a person to get to their true end, and then they'll start making true art. Because, like, I mean, David Lynch is crazy, and he has, like, weird movies, but for as strange as they can be, I can follow along with Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway. I could not, for the life of me, keep track of this. So, that might be one of those things where it's like, you have to watch it again. But it's 3 hours long, so...
That's for the dedicated people.
Yeah. No, I saw it once. That's my duty.
I wish I could do the kind of indecipherable thing more, but man, I had a hard enough time watching Asteroid City, and that one's not that indecipherable. It's just not necessarily clear.
Yeah, at least with Asteroid City, it's funny because it's been so long since I've seen it now, I don't remember what it was, but I thought on it for about a day, and I was like, this is what I think the movie means. And now, because I didn't write that down anywhere, I completely forgot what that was. So, hooray for me.
It's basically just existentialism. That's really all it is. Like, if you want to boil it down to its most basic level and completely undercut the entire thing, you can just say existentialism. It's like,
you're talking like you didn't take a film class.
Oh, I mean, to be fair, this is from my AP English class from high school. That's the. Also, I also call that the time when I learned the worst thing to learn when you have early depression. Yeah, that was a rough year. I won't lie.
Well, let's not dwell on it then. Unfortunately, I would hate to make you upset.
Oh no, I'm good now. Now it's hilarious.
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
I crack up every time, slapping my
yeah.
knees.
No, I've hit my my Camus stage.
Oh, everyone has a Camus stage.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll hit. I was dealing with the Sartre stage early, but then I hit Camus, and I was like, all right, I'm good.
Well, aside from
yeah. Sorry for that aside.
aside from that, another thing that I saw for the first time, I had been avoiding this for a while because I heard from people that it was not great, but I fucking loved it, and that's it's called She-Devil, and it's a movie with Roseanne Barr is the female lead. There's also Meryl Streep and Ed Begley Jr. are in the main roles, and I'm starting to wonder if I've just heard from people that it's a bad movie because Roseanne Barr is a crank and she's like the star of it, and people don't want to watch that. But just as a movie, I really liked it and I had a lot of fun. It's basically Roseanne plays this housewife who's married to Ed Begley Jr. and he's fucking around on her with Meryl Streep, who's like this famous author of romance novels. And after one particularly bad dinner with Ed Begley Jr.'s parents, he walks out on her, and she, like, snaps. But it's interesting because it's not really a revenge movie. It's not framed that way. She kind of has, like, a mental break where she's doing all these crazy things to ruin Ed Begley Jr.'s life. But in her mind, it's not to ruin his life. It's because, oh, well, these are the things he treasures. If he doesn't have all of these anymore, then he will have to come back to me. And so she's basically taking out her aggression on Meryl Streep. And it's really interesting for that because this could have just been like a standard like revenge fantasy movie, but it's really not. It's like this Roseanne character scheming behind the scenes with all these complicated plans, but it's because she really loves Ed Begley Jr. even though he's an asshole. It's really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot.
Man, really, no one's a good person in this.
No, not at all.
See, I kind of adore those movies. It's why I think people found Tiger King as fascinating as it was, because there's no, you don't have to worry about rooting for anybody. You can just look at this and go, man, everyone sucks here. This is hilarious. Yeah,
a hell of a lot of fun. It's a great dark comedy. I'm a big fan of dark comedies in general, so I'm kind of upset I didn't watch it sooner, but that's a decent recommend from me. Aside from that, going to theater talk, I saw two new things in the theater. I saw the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Oh, how was that? I have not heard anything about it, really.
You know what? It was pretty good. It was structured well. I think that the voice cast does great until I gotta frame that. It has a very interesting voiced cast for the main leads because it sort of capitalizes on, hey, these are like teenagers, and so you get a lot of that. But it's pulled off well, and I was having a good time. But when you start getting to this cabal of mutants that sort of act as the main antagonists, then you start getting all of the, here's Seth Rogen, and here's John Cena, and you just sort of go through the motion of all these people, and it's like, okay, they're doing a fine job with the characters, but at a certain point, it's like, yeah, I was really vibing up to this point, and now it's a little frustrating just because I'm not totally invested in it anymore because I just know who all these people are.
I kind of I feel like, I mean, bless him because he's a good person and he does decent work. I feel like John Cena being in a work is kind of like it's kind of like the canary starting to cough in the mine, It's like, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, it's like, all right, I get it. And that's not a problem for everybody, but it can be a problem for me. But, the thing
I think he's a fine guy. It's just like, not a whole lot going on there at a certain point.
Yeah, it's just get the guy in. But the biggest draw for the movie is the art style, and I had the same problem when I watched Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, another movie that I was surprised that I really liked it. Is that a lot of people were being fairly reductive and saying it was just aping the Spider-Verse style, and people have been saying that about the new Turtles movie too. And it's I can see where they're coming from because of what it's trying to do, but it's really only in a couple of categories like Spider-Verse. It's really taking that and taking it in its own direction where it's really grungy and comic book styled. Whereas as far as Spider-Verse goes with comics in their movies is basically down to kind of the poppy colors that they use, and then occasionally like the comic book, like, Bam, wow, Fazoo, whatever, And
Yeah, fair.
the Turtles movie is more of like a grungy graphic novel, and so it's like it's taking like the craft of Spider-Verse, but it's doing its own thing with it. So I wish people would stop saying that. But when it comes to animated movies, I generally don't agree with the mass opinion because a lot of people just don't know what they're talking about.
I've kind of like, and I'm not trying to be like that kind of guy with this statement, but it feels like more and more these days that's kind of the feeling with everything. Once I start seeing like kind of a mass opinion on something, I was just like, okay, so people have bought into one particular line of thinking, and they're just rolling with that for clout or whatever it is that people hang on to that for some reason these days. Meanwhile, I have never once had the fear of missing out. So I see that sort of stuff, and I'm like, nah, it's not for me.
Yeah, we're not doing this.
Like we're not being reductive again, people. Like I got better things to spend my seconds on this earth with.
Yeah, we don't. I won't abide. But yeah, that's the Turtles, and the only other thing I saw, which is the last thing I saw in the theaters, last week possibly, maybe the week before, I don't remember. The Equalizer 3, I saw.
Oh, really? I wouldn't have guessed that was your bag.
It's on. I mean, generally speaking, it's not. I went there. It was a pick that my dad made because I'll go to the theater with him every now and then, and so I sat through it. I have absolutely no familiarity with the Equalizer. I've not seen any of the shows. I've not watched the first 2 movies. But I was like, you really want to see it? I'll go see Equalizer 3. And I mean, Denzel is really good, and I think that the movie works well enough as a standalone where I never really felt like I was missing out on not having seen the first 2 movies.
They're all pretty self-contained. I won't lie.
And that's what I sort of gathered, which I think is a good step for a series like that. Not everything has to be totally serialized. And I think near the end there was like
what a concept, by the way.
Yeah, imagine that. But I think near the end of the movie there was a character that popped up. And my dad, after the fact, was like, "And you probably should have seen the other 2 movies because that guy was in the second movie." And I was like, "Well, it doesn't really. It just, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. It felt like just Denzel's character is a character that has his principles. He cares for this." He cares for this found community that he lives in now, and he takes care of people that he thinks are wronged and that are kind to him. So it's like, yeah, that's that pretty much flows with it. So I didn't have a problem with that. As far as negatives go, the fight scenes were kind of lame and a bit lazy.
That's kind of like having seen the first movie and seen most of the second. They're kind of all like that. I won't lie. Like, power to Denzel Washington. He's a incredible actor, but action star for action scenes, not necessarily. There are some cool scenes. It's very Sherlock Holmes kind of style, but that's kind of like you can kind of do that well maybe once or twice. After that, it's kind of like
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that's basically the brunt of it. And the other thing is that I feel like I'm always complaining about structure because it always feels like people are dropping the ball on that, or maybe things just don't adhere to what I think good structure is. But Dakota Fanning is introduced as a character in this movie and she kind of has like a B plot going on. But not only do they barely go back to it, but they literally forget about it until like the last 5 minutes or so, where she's in the hospital because of her B plot, and they just quickly wrap everything up on the phone. It's like, oh well, someone else took care of it. I'm like, okay. It's like, now you're really, if your goal was to make me pine for the Denzel Washington stuff, then you've really succeeded here, because this is not doing it for me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just like sign of the times, I guess, with just writing quality just kind of being mixed, which I'll actually have a point to make about that with the stuff I've not necessarily watched, but consumed.
Well, let's go into it then, because that's all I have.
Fair. As I've continued to be bad about movies, I started watching, at least on the watching the movies front. I rewatched most of actually Prey, the Predator movie, set like with the Plains Native American tribe. Honestly, still love it. I still think it's really cool. I still am mixed on the original sometimes. I need to rewatch it again, kind of get a fresh opinion about it. But I honestly think Prey is still fantastic. It's kind of everything I'd want in kind of a period piece. And I still love there's kind of the prevailing theory that any movie can be a Predator movie. Like literally just start doing any plot of movie. You could start doing the Barbie movie, and then all of a sudden the Predator shows up and it becomes a Predator movie, like a good Predator movie. And I think there have been a few ones like there's Predators or The Predator or whatever. There's a few of the ones that came prior to Prey, which is a fun sentence to say. Yeah. There's a few of them that were very focused on the Predator itself, and that they weren't as good as a result. They try to like expand their lore or whatever, but it's like, no, it's ultimately what will these characters in this unique situation do to react to the predator showing up? And I think that's when we get the best instances of it with that, with the original, with arguably the sequel, like the direct sequel Predator 2, and then of course Prey. um the first Alien versus Predator I think is fine, just because I think it's so buck wild it's hard to dislike. But again, that also kind of goes more into like the Predator lore, and I think that kind of loses it for me sometimes. um yeah, I think it's a solid. I think Prey is solid. I think it's a great addition to the you know, the series as a whole. And I'd honestly love to just see more people screw around with that, because like, you know, there have been comic books and stuff kind of expanding on that. Like like the Predator, like a Predator shows up on like a pirate ship at one point. I'm like, all right, let's see how that goes. That's basically just, you know, the last voyage of the Demeter, or Demeter, which, hey, relevant for today. Um, but yeah, watch through that. I then started watching, because I found it on Hulu, because I was just trying to find like what's a more like kind of, you know, drama piece that I haven't seen, because I had kind of been craving that for a little while. I started watching the movie Hoffa, the Jimmy
Oh,
Hoffa
yeah.
biopic, like with Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito, and I don't know why. I couldn't really get gripped by it. I honestly didn't love Jack Nicholson's performance. I was just kind of like, this is just kind of lame. Like I'm very interested in this period of history, and I know a bit about Jimmy Hoffa, and just that whole situation. Just like I like, you know, I like Union history and that sort of thing, and like where those sorts of things have gone. Um, but for whatever reason, because like they put him in some level of prosthetic to emulate more closely to what Jimmy Hoffa looked like. So his nose was like kind of done up, and his mouth had probably some sort of like mouthpiece in it to kind of like emulate his oral posture. But I just, for whatever reason, just watching him, I was just like, I'm just not interested. I think Danny DeVito's character, which I'm pretty sure, I don't know whether Danny DeVito's character was a real person or was just an insert for the sake of the audience. Um, but I thought he was the best part, but even then he was kind of dull. So I was like, all right, this is just kind of dry for me right now. So I might try picking it up again later, but for whatever reason, it just did not grip me.
No,
Plus,
that's unfortunate.
there's a bad habit of a lot of those movies, of those kind of like late '80s, like early to mid '90s movies, where it's all like swelling orchestral music scenes as they're saying these like really dramatic things, and like doing like, oh, can do no wrong until they do wrong kind of thing. It's, I don't know. It can all feel very hokey sometimes. I started listening to it, and I was like, this is basically just like watching Nuremberg again. Like
Good
this is
lord.
just, I know that's a different. I know it's a very different movie, but it's like it's got very similar like orchestral scenes and kind of like people standing on soapboxes and like talking about the rights of man and all that sort of things. I was just like, this is just kind of a lot right now. Um,
Did it have my favorite bit that biopics do, where it goes into obsessive detail about like describing or explaining important pieces of the person's life just in the middle of the movie?
a little bit, yeah. Just kind of like explaining, you know, how Hoffa got his start as kind of like a union spokesman, where he would just like hitchhike in with like with truck drivers and things. It kind of went a bit too much into that. Um, there's a scene where they go to like there's a scene where they go to torch a building that's like being run by a guy who's really anti-union, and the whole place goes up, and one of Jimmy Hoffa's partners dies, and the explosion is really like, whoa. It's like, all right, this is weird, and it's like the reason why Danny DeVito's character has an in with him now, because he was like the driver for that night, and so now he's like basically a witness. So I was like, this is all like kind of a lot for. I know ultimately like it all goes to shit because, you know, it's Jimmy fucking Hoffa. Um, Still wasn't expecting that early on. This is like within the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Right.
Um,
Huh, maybe I'll have to give it a watch myself. That period of time is
oh
I
yeah,
mean,
it's a
when Hoffa came out, that period of time is probably my favorite era of Danny DeVito too. It's
yeah.
like, you know,
He is great in it.
It's after Taxi, but it was before he sort of exploded and just became a guy that you put in random TV things.
Because it's him, which, like, you know what, fair
Yeah.
enough. um, yeah, that's pretty much the extent of it for movies and stuff. My main time has been taken up. I obviously brought up last time that I started playing Starfield,
Right.
the latest Bethesda work. Oh boy. I, having had played it now for a few weeks, I'm mixed. I really, really want to enjoy it, but as I kind of alluded to earlier with writing, this has got to be the laziest writing they have ever done for any of their games, especially on their quest lines and faction missions. It's just abysmal. Like, there's just nothing here, and there's this whole thing of, I don't know. It's just like, trying to go through these faction missions. At one point, you can join like this pirate crew effectively. Which, first off, everybody in this pirate faction is a complete dick. Like they constantly are insulting you and like giving you shit and everything. I'm like, why should I continue doing this? I want to be part of this kind of like historically pirate crews were, pretty chummy. Why are we deciding that everyone is constantly at each other's throats? Like this doesn't make any sense. Like no one would continue working together if everyone was this antagonistic. But besides the point, with their faction mission, it's at one point you get, like, just as an example for the writing, at one point you get an assignment with them to sneak onto this like cruise liner and steal credentials for this like one like bank executive guy who's currently on the vessel. And you thinking like, oh, okay, going into this, I have to like sneak around, I have to like integrate into this like big high society party and everything, and like you have to be doing like stealthy, sneaky things, and or like have to quietly figure out ways of like hushing up people, or like maybe even like killing people and doing all these sorts of things. I'm thinking stuff like Dark Brotherhood from Skyrim. The extent of the game of this mission is walking around, talking to a few people, getting a few random like persuasion speech checks, literally walking and breaking open safes in front of people to steal things from people, and then you just leave. It's just it's nothing. Like nothing happens. You're basically just led by the nose by one character to another. You're not expected to do anything creative or do anything with your time there. You're just walking from room to room, and then you leave, and it's done. And it is the most boring shit. And I was flabbergasted at the end of it. It's like, I'm meant to be like this hard-hitting go-getter pirate currently. Also, I want to point out, there's a whole thing, like, and this is mild spoilers, but I don't really care that much. The whole arc of this faction mission with these pirates is that you're trying to find this lost ship that supposedly has like a bunch of money on it. Like, it's like a banking ship. But it neglects to bring up the fact that it's the future and all the money is electronic. How is it that this one ship is acting like, because it's treating the ship like it's like, oh, a modern day equivalent of, oh, it's a bank truck that's holding like a bunch of paper money or a bunch of gold, and that they need to go find it and they'll be rich. But in this world, currency is fully electronic at this point. Like you can transfer it onto basically like floppy disks or disk drives to like differing amounts. How is it that a ship is holding a set amount of these when they can just be like transferred? It doesn't make any fucking sense. It's like you could have just as easily said this is a ship full of gold or platinum or other rare metals that exist in this world. Why did you make it the electronic currency? It's stuff like that where the writing is just so at odds with everything else in its own reality. Like it seems like none of the mechanics actually work well together as a result. Like it's this whole overarching thing of like, oh, you're meant to be doing exploration and all this stuff, but then you go to these planets that are supposedly super uncharted, but then you're surrounded by abandoned buildings and like it's like, oh, here I am. I've landed on this alien world. Oh, there's an abandoned like gas extraction, like gas processing plant down the road, like 100 meters away. Like, what the fuck? What's the point? It's like I don't get it. It's just I don't know. I just literally it got me so annoyed at a certain point, and I got like it got so droll for me at a certain point that I literally went back and started playing Fallout 4 again, and I was like, wow, like discovery and finding things and having cool locations that I can just discover randomly. It's like, this is fun. And it's congratulations, Bethesda. You've made me love your older titles more. So yeah, sorry, that was a very long diatribe, and you can fully cut that down if you want to. But
no, very informational. I'm glad
I've tried so hard to enjoy it, but God, it is making it difficult.
Yeah, I'm glad that I've held off on it because I said that maybe I would give it a try when it was on Game Pass, but honestly, I haven't had any drive to just because it really doesn't interest me.
It wouldn't be your bag, I don't think. The writing in it the Bethesda writing has never been this lazy. Like it is truly just like the game in general, because they barely crafted anything. Like at least with Fallout 4, at least with Skyrim and everything, they had to craft a whole continent or a whole city or a whole whatever to do with this. But the majority of Starfield is randomly generated when you land on these planets versus having like, and then also like there's a few missions that'll have slightly more designed environments that are consistent throughout playthroughs. But there's even an occasion where on one story mission, I went to a location and I had to go into this like deep underground facility that was like over like, it was meant to be like a cryogenic facility that all the cryogenics had broken like loose. Like most of the facility was like fully frozen over. And it was really cool. I had a story of people talking about like on their computers going like, hey, these safety standards are very poor. We're going to have a major disaster. And it's like slowly reading that and realizing, oh, these people were all doomed from the start. It's a very harrowing story and everything. It's like, okay, cool. This is a very interesting, unique build up for why I'm actually here in this location. And then a few hours of gameplay later, I randomly just going on, just exploring, I find another facility, and it's the exact same place. It's on a different planet in a different star system. It is the exact same facility. I was thinking, okay, it's just a reused, like, at least setting setup. It can't possibly be everything else identical. It's everything identical. It's the same computers talking about the same issues of like, oh, our safety procedures aren't good and all that sort of thing. It's the exact same characters. Everything is placed in the exact. It's literally just copy and pasted, and because it's just like it's a randomly generated, randomly selected setup. But it's the fact that nothing in it changed at all, even though it's in a completely different area. Like they could have just taken it out, like taken out the story bits and just been like, oh, this is just a frozen over facility, and that would have been it. That would have been fine. I probably wouldn't have noticed. But because the story setup in it is exactly the same, it tells me, oh, it's just literally identical. And there's so many instances of that. I've walked through the same facilities like 80 times. I'm just so sick of it. I'm just like, I don't like, where was all this time and polish going into if not into the actual stuff that you're interacting with? Like, because it's not the story, it's not the writing. So where was all this effort going? I think it was just making sure all the systems didn't cause the like whole game to burst into flames, because there's so many at this point.
Yeah, I think it was literally just to get their fucking engine
Yeah.
working properly. And I said this when the game, not necessarily when the game was announced, but I do remember saying it when they started announcing like the mass traversal and the thousands of planets to explore thing, and just that is not Bethesda's strong suit. And I really wish that they had not gone the No Man's Sky route for their style of games, because No Man's Sky, I will stand by, it has improved in recent years. But it's not built in the same way a Bethesda game usually is, with the world crafting and everything. There's stuff like that in there, but it's mostly about like survival and resource gathering and like, you know, exploring new flora and fauna, not necessarily like trying to uncover specific stories and dealing with factions. It doesn't seem like randomly generated works well for a company that's known for building up worlds with history.
Mm-hmm. And, like, the history itself that they set up is fine. Like, I kind of like the history that they've set up for this universe of theirs. But it's very clear that that creating a universe whole hog isn't their usual bag. Usually they come into a universe kind of pre-made, hence with both the Elder Scrolls and with Fallout. But I still think it's serviceable, at least. You know, it has a very interesting of, like, you know, breakaway factions. Like, you know, the Earth has, at this point in history, like, the Earth's atmosphere, like, basically fizzled away, and Earth is inhospitable at this point. So it sets up all those like different kinds of things. It's all just the various little things kind of just building on each other that make me realize, God, I'm just kind of bored, and it's not doing anything for me. And I won't go any further into it just because I've ranted a lot about it. But it's just, I still can't necessarily, like, I still enjoy what I can do in it. There's a few locations, a few cities that I especially like. And plus, I'm just an absolute nerd for space anyway. Like, literally, there's a mission eventually where you had to interact with, like, old Earth NASA, and I was immediately like, this is the greatest day of my life. This is the coolest shit in the world. I absolutely love NASA. So it still has things that grip me, but there's just enough of it that I'm just like, God, I just wish they could get their act together finally. Because, like, the writing is just so inexcusably bad sometimes. It's just, again, sign of the times more than anything, but still, like, golly, Bethesda, like, I'm not even asking for A material. I'd settle for like C material at this point. But yeah, that's that's kind of my experience with it lately. I've been getting back into Fallout 4 now. I just haven't played it for a while, and it's nice. It's a comfort game for me more than anything. And also I have also been playing, because it also came out on Game Pass, a game called Solar Ash. Pretty minor game, by the same people who did Hyper Light Drifter, which I've never played, but it's very much like a traversal kind of game. Like, you're skating around like this, you know, crazy void scape and everything, and kind of doing various missions. I think it's okay. I think it has more story going on than it needs. I figured it was mostly just going to be kind of like a voiceless character, just kind of like kind of more along the lines of like Journey than anything. But there's a lot of actual active story going on. I'm like, it's fine. I mainly just care about the gameplay. So I've maybe played through half of it. It's pretty decent.
Very good.
Yeah, that has been my Starfield cast. I'm very sorry. It didn't mean to go on that hard.
All these things happen when we're the most passionate.
Jesus Christ. I wish I could be more concise when I'm passionate, at the very least.
Yeah, well, stream of thought is like the defining feature of passion. So
that's fair. Yeah, beyond that, haven't really done a whole lot else. That's kind of taken up most of my time. That's all I got.
All right, understood. Well, for lack of a good segue, we should probably just talk about Dracula, huh?
Ain't Nick Cage just wacky?
He can be.
Yes, it's Dracula and Renfield. So kicking us off, we of course have the original 1931 Dracula, which was directed by Todd Browning, screenplay by Garrett Fort, and is of course based on the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. Its cast is made up of Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, Helen Chandler as Mina Seward, David Manners as John Harker, David Fry as Renfield. Keep an eye on that name. We'll see more of it later. Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, which is a very convenient coincidence for the name. Herbert Bunston as Dr. Seward, Frances Dade or Dade as Lucy Weston, and Joan Standing as Nurse Briggs. Kicking off the plot, Renfield is a solicitor traveling to one Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania on a business matter. The local village people fear that vampires inhabit the castle and warn Renfield not to go in there. Renfield refuses to stay at the village inn and instead asks his carriage driver to drive him up to Borgo Pass. There he is met by a carriage owned by the Count Dracula. He is then driven to the castle in this coach, with Dracula having disguised himself as the driver. En route, Renfield sticks his head out the window to ask the driver to slow down, but sees that the driver has disappeared and that a bat is leading the horses. Upon arrival, Renfield enters the castle and is welcomed by the charming but eccentric Count, who, unbeknownst to him, is a vampire. Go figure. They discuss Dracula's intention to lease one Carfax Abbey in England, where he intends to travel the next day. Dracula then proceeds to hypnotize Renfield into opening a window. Renfield faints as another bat appears, and Dracula's three wives close in on around him. Dracula waves them away, and instead he himself attacks Renfield. Soon after, on the following night, aboard a schooner named the Vesta, Renfield has become a raving lunatic slave under Dracula, who now hides in a coffin and feeds on the ship's crew. When the ship eventually arrives in England, Renfield is discovered to be the only living person left. He is sent to one Dr. Seward's sanatorium adjoining Carfax Abbey. Elsewhere, at a London theater, Dracula meets with Dr. Seward. Seward then proceeds to introduce him to his daughter Mina, her fiancé John Harker, and another family friend, Lucy Weston. Lucy is fascinated with Dracula. That night, Dracula enters into her room and feasts on her blood while she sleeps. She dies the next day after a string of blood transfusions. We cut away to see Renfield obsessed with eating flies and spiders in his sanatorium cell. One polymath doctor, Professor Van Helsing, analyzes his blood and discovers this obsession. He starts talking about vampires, for some kind of apropos of nothing, and that afternoon, Renfield begs Seward to send him away, claiming that his nightly cries may disturb his daughter Mina's dreams. When Dracula calls Renfield through the medium of a wolf howling, Renfield is disturbed by Van Helsing showing him wolfsbane, which Van Helsing says is used for protection against vampires by the locals of Transylvania. Dracula soon after visits Mina, asleep in her bedroom, and bites her. The next evening, he enters their home for a visit, and Van Helsing, who is visiting, and John Harker, her fiancé, notice that he does not have a reflection in the mirror. Van Helsing reveals this to Dracula, causing him to smash the mirror, and then soon after leaving. Van Helsing then deduces from this interaction that Dracula is the vampire behind these recent tragedies. Mina leaves her room and runs into Dracula in their garden, where he then attacks her. The maid finds her soon after. Harker wants to take Mina into London for safety, but is convinced to leave her with Van Helsing instead. Van Helsing then orders Nurse Briggs to take care of Mina when she sleeps and to not remove a wreath of wolfsbane from her neck. Renfield escapes from his cell at the sanatorium and listens to the men discussing vampires. Before he is taken back to his cell, Renfield relates to them how Dracula convinced him to allow him to enter the sanatorium by promising him thousands of rats full of blood and life. Dracula enters the Seward parlor and talks with Van Helsing. He states that Mina now belongs to him and warns Van Helsing to return to his home country. Van Helsing swears to excavate Carfax Abbey and destroy Dracula in the process. Dracula attempts to hypnotize Van Helsing, but the latter's resolve proves far stronger. As Dracula lunges at Van Helsing, he draws a crucifix from his coat, forcing Dracula to retreat from him. Harker then visits Mina out on a terrace, and she speaks of how much she loves night and fogs, because, she's just kind of in that kind of mood. A bat then flies above them and squeaks to Mina. She then attacks Harker, but Van Helsing and Seward save him. Mina confesses what Dracula has done to her and tells Harker that their love is now finished. Dracula then hypnotizes Nurse Briggs into removing the wolfsbane from Mina's neck and opening all the windows. Van Helsing and Harker see Renfield headed for Carfax Abbey. Arriving there, they see Dracula with Mina having now kidnapped her. When Harker shouts to Mina, Dracula believes that Renfield has instead betrayed him by leading the three of them there, and then proceeds to kill him. Dracula is hunted by Van Helsing and Harker, who know that Dracula is forced to sleep in his coffin during daylight, and the sun is beginning to rise. Van Helsing prepares a makeshift wooden stake from Dracula's coffin lid, while Harker searches for Mina. Van Helsing impales Dracula through the heart, killing him, and Mina returns to normal soon after. Now, going on to the long overdue sequel, which, as a reminder to those listeners, we do count those as remakes because, well, it's capitalizing on an original, therefore it's basically a remake in spirit. But yeah, might be surprised that the 2023 film Renfield is in fact meant to be a direct sequel from the original 1931 Dracula. Renfield is directed by Chris McKay, with a screenplay by Ryan Ridley, story by Robert Kirkman. It is based, of course, on the book Dracula by Bram Stoker, and also the movie of the same name. Its cast is made up of Nicholas Hoult as Renfield, Nicolas Cage as Dracula, that's going to be confusing, Awkwafina as Rebecca, Ben Schwartz, of all people, as Tedward Lobo, Shohreh Aghdashloo as Bella Francesca Lobo, Brandon Scott Jones as Mark, Adrian Martinez as Chris, and Camille Chen as Kate. Kicking off into the plot, and we should mention that it's a bit of a revisionist sequel. It brings up the fact that both Dracula and Renfield are in fact still alive at the end of the 1931 film, so presumably they got the better of whatever was going on with Van Helsing and company. But continuing on, kicking off, in the early 20th century, Transylvanian vampire Count Dracula meets one English lawyer, R.M. Renfield. Renfield hopes to broker a land deal, and after proving to be a useful assistant, he ends up becoming Dracula's familiar, which grants him immortality and super strength and speed whenever he consumes bugs. Because that's apparently become a specific plot point now, is him eating bugs. Some 90 years later, Renfield has grown weary of bringing victims to Dracula, as well as the latter's abuse. They recently had a close call with vampire hunters who almost killed Count Dracula, and so the duo decides to move to New Orleans to recuperate. There, Renfield discovers a 12-step self-help guide for people in a codependent relationship and plans to hunt down the group's abusive lovers so that he can give them to Dracula to feast on without feeling any remorse. By following one to a warehouse with stolen drugs, Renfield is instead confronted by several criminals before they are all attacked by an assassin hired by the rival Lobo crime family. After killing the assassin, Renfield unsuccessfully attempts to hunt down the man who hired him, one Teddy Lobo, who drives off in a hurry, and a weakened Renfield then decides to drag the corpses of the people that were killed back to Dracula's lair in the basement of a dilapidated hospital. Teddy runs into a sobriety checkpoint that is run by one Rebecca Quincy, a second-generation police officer who arrests Teddy. At the police station, Teddy is quickly released from custody by a series of corrupt police officers, while Rebecca has a confrontation with her sister Kate, an FBI agent. Remember when this was about, vampires? Dracula tells Renfield that the criminals he has brought as food are insufficient, and that the vampire desires the blood of the pure and innocent instead. Renfield goes to a restaurant to abduct commoners, while Rebecca is also led there by clues from the crime scene of the previous night. The two are caught in an attack on Rebecca's life that Teddy has been pressured into making. Instead, Renfield and Rebecca defend themselves, killing several gang members and leading Teddy to another escape. Teddy's mother, Bella Francesca, orders him to hunt down the man who killed her foot soldiers, and he ends up encountering Dracula when Renfield is out. The two agree to form an alliance while Renfield has taken to heart the teachings of his self-help group and decides to make a life for himself apart from his master. Setting up an apartment and changing his attitude to one of helpfulness, Renfield gives a statement to the police to help them finally stop the Lobos. However, Dracula learns of Renfield's betrayal and slaughters the support group members right in front of him. Rebecca appears soon after the murders and finds Renfield surrounded by a series of dead bodies, causing her to have to arrest him, until she is suddenly swarmed by a series of corrupt police officers and the Lobos, who all want revenge on Renfield for his killings. Rebecca refuses to hand Renfield over, and she barely escapes with him. The next morning, Rebecca finds that Renfield has saved her life, and he explains his true origins while confirming that he wants to reform himself. The two fight through a group of corrupt police officers and Lobo henchmen that come to the apartment to kill them and escape, but after attempting to call Kate, Rebecca discovers that she's been taken hostage by Dracula and Bella Francesca. She and Renfield stockpile weapons and bugs, because again, that's a whole thing, in order to storm the Lobo headquarters, only to find that Dracula has empowered over half a dozen gang members and Teddy in order to act as guards against him, having to match up with Renfield's supernatural abilities. After a fight, Renfield kills Teddy and the gang members. Rebecca heads to stop Dracula, only to find that Kate has been beaten near death, and that only the healing properties of Dracula's blood, by the way, Dracula's blood can heal people, only the properties of Dracula's blood can save her, which he will offer in exchange for Rebecca's total loyalty. She instead tricks Dracula and injures him by exposing him to sunlight, leading him to have a final standoff with Renfield and Rebecca that ends with the two of them capturing him in a magical circle. Oh, by the way, that's a whole thing as well. It's set up in the very beginning, but it's only brought up in the end. Very, very Chekhov's gun, but too much, if you ask me. Anyway, Renfield and Rebecca beat Dracula into pieces with a series of medieval weaponry that the Lobo families had stored, because that's just their whole thing, along with many methods of vampire weaknesses, such as holy water, garlic, etc. They then encase the pieces of Dracula's corpse into tiny concrete blocks and scatter them among the city's water system, in order to prevent his resurrection. Kate is soon after then healed, Bella Francesca is arrested, and Renfield resurrects his self-help group friends with the use of Dracula's blood, feeling empowered to make a new life for himself. Again, remember when this was about vampires?
Yeah, it's unnecessarily complicated.
Oh my god.
To an Indian degree.
There's a whole thing with self-help and everything. We'll get into that. I need a sip.
Yeah, and in the meanwhile, full circle. Alright, we've got a number of folks here, most of them for Renfield. If you can imagine it, we've covered a great deal of these people before, but firstly we'll go look at Dracula, 1931. We have Dwight Frye, who played Renfield. He was also Fritz in 31's Frankenstein, and he was Wilmer Cook in The Maltese Falcon, both of which were also 1931. 1931, huge year for Dwight Frye. I think I said the same thing in the Maltese Falcon episode.
Yeah, no, fair. Hey, there was a lot going on. Which you couldn't make that many movies in a year back then, so.
Oh yeah, no trouble at all. Oh, and also, lastly, for Dracula 1931, we have Edward Van Sloan, who was Abraham Van Helsing. He played Dr. Waldman in 1931's Frankenstein, so a lot of bleed between the various Universal monster flicks.
It's like, if there's going to be any, that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. All right, moving on to 2023's Renfield. We have Awkwafina, who was Rebecca Quincy in Renfield. She also played Constance in Ocean's 8, 2018.
Oh, yeah, Ocean's 8. Fully forgot that one.
Yeah, it was one of our very few They Remade It Again episodes.
Oh, yeah, true.
Bess Rouse, or Bess Rue, was Caitlin in 2023's Renfield. She also played Gertrude Aldridge in 2016's Ghostbusters Answer the Call.
Yeah, I don't remember that at all.
Yep, I figured as much. Joshua McKell was Phil in Renfield, and he played Armand in 2016's Independence Day Resurgence.
I'm seeing a trend here.
All right. No, so we have two left, but they're both big names. Nicholas Hoult, of course, was Renfield in Renfield. He also played Eusebius in 2010's Clash of the Titans.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I knew I saw him from something.
Not the menu?
I mean, something that we had done. You know, the only important thing, of course.
Yes, true. And lastly, of course, Nick Cage was Dracula in Renfield, and he was Edward Malice in 2006's The Wicker Man. We've only covered him twice, but
he tends to do pretty original. He tends to do pretty original stuff, honestly, which is good for him.
Yeah, now that I think about it, I can't really think of many.
It's a trailer for one
remakes.
There's a trailer for an A24 movie that came out recently that has him. I can't remember what it is, but basically the plot of it is, for some reason, this guy, this random professor, played by Nick Cage, is just popping up in people's dreams for no particular reason. He's just in their dreams, like a bunch of people all around the world are like, "Why are you in my dreams, man?" He's like, "I don't know." I'm like, "All right, that looks fun.
Leave me alone."
Yeah, basically. Yeah, sorry, that was just kind of a little aside there.
No, that's fine. He does fun stuff, but that's the end of Full Circle.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to let you kind of take the lead here. I imagine you probably have more experience with the original Dracula than me. I will admit I have never actually seen it prior to this. I thought I had, but I very much hadn't. You tend to know the classics more than I do.
Right. Well, plus we're talking like monster movies as well.
Oh yeah,
so
exactly. Which is definitely your bag.
get into monsters or horror movies. So it is interesting what we're doing, just because obviously Dracula has been remade a number of times. So we didn't do Bram Stoker's with Gary Oldman. We didn't do like the 20. No, we didn't. We did Renfield because it just came out and we thought it'd be fun. And when we did Frankenstein, we did Young Frankenstein, which was a comedy. So it kind of tracks between things.
It would be too easy to try and do the original with, like one of the other ones, like with Keanu Reeves or whatever.
Right.
Just because, like, obviously that's a big one. But I thought it was genuinely, because I had the choice on this movie this time around, and I thought it was genuinely really interesting that they decided to make a technically direct sequel with Renfield. Which I do like. There's a little touch at the very beginning where they actually recreate a number of scenes from the original with the new cast. Like, very briefly, it's meant to be like a flashback sort of scene. And I think they actually did a very good job.
Right.
I think, I will say, kind of on top of it, like, before anything, I think Nick Cage actually does a pretty solid, at least like comparison to Bela Lugosi in those early shots at the very least.
Yeah. No, I do too, and I'll certainly want to touch on that because there's a couple things I like about Renfield. Heavy emphasis on couple. But so going back to the 31 Dracula, of course, it's interesting for a number of reasons. This being well, firstly, this isn't the first sequel to direct sequel to Dracula because, of course, there's also Dracula's Daughter, which released in the 30s. So one, we wouldn't have been able to cover it for the show because it wouldn't have met our criteria. But that one also, takes place directly after the events of the first Dracula. The problem is that it's really easy to forget a lot of the sequels that come out of the Universal monster flicks because they just cranked them out. Son of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, yeah. Frankenstein meets Wolfman. Like, they just wouldn't stop. They were trying to capture that lightning in a bottle, But I do have experience with the first Dracula. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I had seen it a number of times. I actually had it on DVD in high school, and it was a double feature that I picked up. It had the 31 Dracula and another movie I've mentioned on this show before, Spanish Dracula, which I call it that, but it's really just Dracula, but made in Mexico. And that one also came out in 1931. And I don't know if I would qualify it as better, but it is a lot more faithful to the source material, and it's really interesting to watch. So I do have experience with Dracula. It's just been a while since I had engaged with it. That being said, I also had experience with Renfield because I watched it earlier this year. And I was fully down for this episode because I was excited to talk Dracula. But I was dreading revisiting Renfield a little bit because I did not have a positive experience watching that in the theater. It was not, not great.
I had a feeling that was your feelings on the matter.
Yeah, I think I even complained about it a little bit on the show, but I didn't go too heavily into it because by that point I knew we were already going to be talking about it in October. But yeah, you mentioned the opening title crawl for Renfield, where it sort of recreates the scenes from the original movie, but of course Dracula is Nick Cage and Nicholas Hoult is Renfield in those scenes. And those are, honest to God, the highlight of the movie for me, is the opening, minute and a half when it does that.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, that's just because it looks interesting, and it's neat that they're playing with it. But then once it gets into this weird quasi future, and God, like I mentioned after the synopsis, talk about complicated, where we have to pull in the cops and the FBI and this gangland shit, and I honestly just do not care. I'm willing to give a pass to the abuse council meetings that are going on in there, because at least that's kind of going for a theme, and I think that's one of the more interesting things that the movie tries to do.
I will say, I do like the cleverness with that, with the concept of taking this whole idea of, supernatural familiar and projecting it onto the situation of a codependent relationship. I thought when I first heard about that, I was like, okay, that's clever. I think that's a fun kind of subverting of that whole kind of concept of having a basically a supernatural slave, but just in more the relationship of a workplace or romantic relationship.
Yeah, just a toxic codependent relationship where one person is clearly coming out with they're getting more out of this relationship than the other person is. And it's funny because the trailers focused on that so much. I thought it was going to be a larger part of the movie, but aside from kind of being the push that he needs to get away from Dracula, it doesn't play into a lot of the the actual film or like the consequences of the movie because it's too focused on this bullshit with the cops and like the gang stuff, and Ben Schwartz has like Renfield powers now, and it's way too much.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's, you know what I kind of realize now? It feels like this version of New Orleans, it's basically just Gotham. This is basically just Gotham, and somehow Renfield is our Batman, which I recognize the irony there with having Dracula.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also cartoonishly absurd. Some of the things that like these gang members and everything are doing, and like all this crazy shit going on, that's just like feels like somehow in the background, but still taking up way too much space from the Renfield story. Because I will say, I think it makes, if you just watched Renfield on its own, I feel like it would be such a chaotic mess that I don't know how it would be enjoyable. But honestly, now having seen both of them together, I can kind of enjoy it in its own way of seeing like actually we have actually seeing Renfield's descent into madness in the original, and then just seeing him tired of it all in the like in Renfield, and like the Renfield movie, I should say, not just the character. I kind of thought that was hilarious. Of like just like seeing this genuinely tortured soul in the original, and just like the shot of him at the bottom of the, you know, like the stairway on the ship is obviously iconic, of him just like bleary-eyed and like staring up at the camera is an incredible shot. Which I gotta say before I'll just quick tangent, cinematography in the original, fucking stellar. Like it is iconic for a reason.
Yeah, Carl Freund.
My God, a master, like a master of just like the lighting and everything. I just like subtlety of it. It's just brilliant. That needs to be said. I could say it 1,000 times. I'd go on about it, but I'm going to try to avoid it. But my point being here that seeing Renfield go from madman to tired madman is kind of hilarious. I don't necessarily like where they ended up taking it, where he kind of like recognized this whole thing of, you know what, no, I did throw my life away. I was willingly taken in by Dracula. Because it makes it seem like in the remake in Renfield that Dracula doesn't have direct hypnotic powers. He's just a very persuasive man. Like he is basically offering these things to people, and people are choosing them of their own accord. Whereas in the original, he's definitely hypnotizing people. Like it's definitely like they're doing things outside of their normal cognitive like desire. It's not doing any kind of like special effects or anything. It has Bela Lugosi's eyes illuminated over the rest of his face in darkness, and just him directly staring at the subject in question. And then they just start doing wild shit. Like we clearly see it happen with Renfield, and we clearly see it happen with several other people. And I don't really know why. Okay, well, I know why they decided to change that, because they're trying to go with the whole like codependency thing. But I think it's only to its detriment. I think you could have still made the point they were making with the fact that Dracula does actually straight up magically manipulate people. Like it's not just a matter of, oh, he's a very persuasive man, like he'll make you do whatever he wants because, you know, that's what he's, you know, he as a predatory person can do. It's like, no, he's a literal monster. Like he's capable of doing that.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that Renfield as a character has a warped mind due to the hypnosis, and he's in a fit of mania, and that's just sort of how he exists.
Yeah.
But you don't see any of that in the Nicholas Hoult character, and I do find some enjoyment with the like being fed up with it all, but and maybe it would be a tough tightrope to walk, but I think you could have a little bit of both of that, because in the original film, like for example, he defends Mina to an extent by giving them this information on Dracula, and he still recognizes the Count as his master and pleads with him, I serve you, and we do this, we do that. But he also realizes what's going on is wrong. He just can't really help himself. And it feels like that's missing from Renfield, the movie, because it's changed to be more, it's an abusive relationship, it's toxic, and he feels he has to do what Dracula's saying just because he's in too deep at this point.
Yeah. And I think, and this is probably a reach, and I'm going to say I'm not at all like kind of qualified to talk about this sort of thing. Obviously, codependency and toxicity in relationships is a very serious topic. We're not going to claim to be experts here. We're just going to spitball on. But it would make sense to me if they decided to make his character less crazy specifically because of that, because there is a genuine precedence of, mental illness being a part of, people being victims of, toxic relationships and abusive relationships. Because, he very much is not in his right mind in the original. Like, that's made clear. The fact that he's eating flies and bugs and wanting to eat, like, rats and stuff isn't because he's being given superpowers for it. It's because he's basically his mind has been warped by Dracula's influence, who Dracula himself consumes the living to survive. Now, Renfield himself is kind of the same mind, but it's not necessarily clear whether that's true. It might just be the fact of that's what Dracula's influence has done to his mind, that he's basically just forced himself into this role of like eating these small creatures because that's what he feels he must do because he's basically just been driven to madness. Instead, they decided to take that, albeit somewhat small plot point, and make it like his superpower in Renfield. I'm like, all right, that's a little odd. Um, like I could get to the fact of like maybe he was subsisting on flies and like spiders and stuff in the original because like maybe that did extend his life, but I don't know if it ever implied that it gave him superpowers. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, my understanding of it was always, I to be fair, I can't speak for you, but I have no experience with the actual work by Bram Stoker. I have it, but I have never read it. So
I am aware of the story. I have not personally read the book, but I have seen multiple different synopses of the story, so I'm aware of like what happens. The 31
right.
is sort of close. I'm pretty sure the character of Renfield is made up whole cloth for the movie. I'm pretty sure in the book his position is taken up by John Harker. I'm almost certain.
Yeah, I guess that answers my question, because I was going to state I don't know, to what extent insects specifically play into the novel, but my reading on this has always been that as a thrall of the Count, he also craves blood. It's just, he's not getting humans and eating them or draining them of their blood because that's his master, and since he is subservient, he has to feast on things that are subservient in the food chain or would be seen as lesser, which would be insects. And that's always been my reading. And I mean, that extends to rats too, because those are mammals, but they're like lowly mammals, quote unquote.
Right,
So,
yeah. It's never truly explained necessarily why Renfield is doing these things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It definitely is kind of going for some more subtlety with his character, which I honestly kind of find refreshing at times. But yeah, it's, and I feel like I feel like I'm talking down on the Renfield movie a lot. I have to say, I find it not charmingly entertaining, but I find there's a certain level of almost gaucheness to it that's just like, this is absurd. I'm having fun. Of just the whole concept of this Renfield character of Nicholas Holt's, portrayal, doing all this crazy shit, and then also just truly some of the most unapologetically crappy CG effects for violence and things.
oh,
Um,
jeez.
I gotta say, there's a lot of action sequences in this, and this is like, it's got that really kind of cheaply done, um, almost B movie kind of like CG blood splatters and like blood spurts and things. You can kind of see a similar thing in the Hellboy remake, um, where it just doesn't look realistic even slightly, and it doesn't even try to be. Like, there's more than one occasion where like Renfield's character will swing towards a guy, and the action that he's making with the swing, one, almost never looks like it connects in certain situations, and two, doesn't look, even if it did connect, would not make the kind of blood splatter that ends up coming out from the person that he supposedly hits. And so a lot of it's just kind of poorly put together. There's a lot of times where it seems like sound effects are randomly added in when they shouldn't have been. Like, there's extra gunshots when we're not seeing the gun being shot. It's just kind of like there at the end. There's a lot of moments of like people diving over tables or jumping over things, or just cuts to them on the other shot, and one person just goes "fuck," and it's just like, oh, okay, why did you do that? Why did we cut away? And then just cuts to the next scene. I'm like, oh, okay, we're moving on. It's like it's very poorly assembled and poorly kind of conceived at the end of the day. But it's hard not. It's like, I went into this not taking it seriously at all, because like the whole thing of it's just a farce. Like, the whole thing is like, oh, it's just a very thinly veiled attempt at poking at the concept. It's basically what we do in the shadows, just with a more specific plot. Is all is basically is what I'm finding here, is the whole thing of, oh, it's basically a fish out of water story with like Dracula more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm gonna sound really nitpicky with this, because I
Oh,
do
right ahead.
definitely I do definitely agree on those points for what you're saying. I guess my main disconnect with Renfield as a movie is the fact that there are a lot of pieces in it that I enjoy for various reasons, but they're usually in movies that I can tell are taking themselves seriously. The fact that this is billed as a comedy and has comedic writing attributed to it, a lot of this doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't scream intentional to me in some aspects, and then the other aspects that do seem like intentional decisions, it's really a catch-22, where it's like, you can't please me no matter what, because in those other situations it's like, okay, I see what you're doing and you're clearly winking, but I'm not buying into the story itself, so it feels oddly hollow in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
Like, something that I've mentioned before on the show is The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, which I know multiple people have differing opinions on that, but I really like that movie as like a horror comedy. Well, it's more of a sci-fi comedy, but you can kind of classify it as horror, where it was made in like the 2000s, but it's meant to be a parody of B movies, and it's extremely specific down to the way scenes are shot and the way characters talk and like the dialogue they have. Like the main character of that movie is a scientist, but he never says what his science is. He always just says, "I'm a scientist and I work on science," which is such
Fantastic.
like a 50s sci-fi thing to do.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
something like that is usually what I'm looking for in a comedy like that. It's just there's a lot of moments in movies like this, comedies specifically, that just really take me out of it because the writing all goes back to similar touchstones or places, and it. I am by no means the first or only person to say this, but comedy ages worse than any other medium or any
Oh,
other
God.
genre. And
To make a truly timeless comedy is a Herculean effort, and is
yeah,
in many cases impossible.
it's just it's something that I had a hard time getting into. The one thing I was very blessed with, and I said this after I saw it in the theater as well, is the worst line in the trailer, I think, is like they're going through the plot, blah blah blah, and then Aquafina starts talking, and it cuts to them at her place, and it's her on the couch, and she says, "You're like the guy who delivers the villain's Postmates," which is such a bad joke. But I was very happy because I watched the movie, and that trailer line was not in the movie. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Yay, they cut it! I hate that line."
There's actually a few moments I've kind of
small
noticed with
victories.
that, where they've done the opposite of what normally happens, where they have something really interesting in the trailer, but then they don't have it in the movie. There was actually a few lines in the trailer that they just decided not to keep in the final cut that actually was to its benefit. There's a line at the beginning of the trailer talking about, it's like, don't worry, son, you're here being protected by the most trustworthy organization in the world, the Catholic Church. And it's like, all right, come on, like that's like, yeah, obviously that feels like low hanging joke fruit, but also the fact that the guy was clearly dressed up in what looked like an Orthodox Christian church, like Eastern Orthodox, not Catholic outfit, but that's just me. I might be completely wrong there. But that wasn't in the final cut. Instead, he says something along the lines of, you have stalled our efforts, and therefore every drop of blood this man spills from this day forth will be your fault." And I was like, oh shit, that's actually a really heavy line. And then Dracula proceeds to explode this priest, like literally explode him.
Yeah, the effects
Yeah.
are crazy.
Yeah. It's like, again, I find them almost charmingly bad because like they made, like, there's no effort being made here. Like there are moments where at one point two dudes get impaled on another dude's arms. Like the Renfield character throws a dude's severed arm so hard they impales two people. Like, all right. Like, and it's also like the fact of like all the amount of gory things happening, and the characters basically end up in many cases near spotless. I'm like, in reality, yeah, like if these level of wounds were being made, yeah, they wouldn't spill near as much blood as these effects are doing. But with the amount of blood you are showing, they should be drenched. Like, what is happening? So
Yeah.
there's just kind of that disconnect with everything. So it's just kind of odd at times.
I think maybe the weirdest part for me is, seeing this on the big screen. And I said the same thing last year when I saw Jeepers Creepers Rebirth or Reborn or whatever the hell that thing was called.
Yeah.
Where after I saw it, I was like, those might be the worst special effects I have ever seen on the big screen. And Renfield is not as bad, but it comes pretty close. And I think that was the big shocker for me because like effects shouldn't be and everything. Like I like to stand up for practical effects where at all possible. It's just it was very jarring, and I would almost rather that they didn't do it at all because of that. And
Yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna compare those things, like you can look at 1931 Dracula, and they'll have like a bat on a string
Yeah, I was gonna say
floating in a window. But one, it was 1931, and two, they at least like go to the effort of hiding the string in darkness.
Yeah,
It's not like a castle picture where it's just like everything's on display. Like there's someone is working as hard as they can.
It is honestly, I was honestly shocked by how little they truly did any sort of like attempt at effects or that sort of thing. We never truly, because there's a lot of moments we'll see where we'll see a bat fly across the screen, and then it'll cut, and Dracula will just be standing there, like no real kind of fanfare about it, but it's meant to be like, okay, Dracula was a bat, and now he's turned back into himself. You see that in the modern equivalent, there's all these effects going on, and of course in Renfield, Dracula doesn't just turn into a bat; he turns into a whole swarm of bats, and there's just I was surprised at how subtle the 1931 Dracula was. I think that's the best way I could say it, because at times it was dry to the point of near boredom, because there's a lot of moments where there's not a lot of music, there's not a lot of like background score going on, which is, I know, common enough for the time. But at times I was, at least in the early film, before the boat reaches England, I was near bored to tears. I was like, okay, this is not really what I was hoping for. This is just kind of rough. I don't necessarily love this going on. But then once it did once, for whatever reason, it just started clicking with me after that, of just seeing, obviously Dracula's hypnosis and how it's done very subtly. There's no real effect. It's just Bela Lugosi's face with a strip of light across his eyes and the rest of his face in mostly darkness, just staring at whoever he's subjecting his power to, and it's just subtle and almost creeping dread in a lot of ways. And I was like, this is really good. And again, all credit goes to the set design, the lighting, the shot setup. It's everything in it. It sneaks up on you how good it is. Because on its surface, it's a film from the 1930s. It shows its age on its sleeve like nothing else. But at a certain point, it stops mattering, and it really is able to grip you in a way you don't expect it to. At least it did for me. I adored every second of it from that point forward. Like literally, when truly it was that moment where it was the shot of Renfield on the boat, like staring off the camera. From that moment on, I was hooked. It was so good. And it's just. And, the fact that it isn't trying to, like, at times it feels like it's kind of beating you over the head with, like, oh, vampires, I have discovered this man as a vampire. But at the same time, like, thinking about it for the day, like, we didn't have all the context for vampires at the time. Seeing a shot of 3 people talking and then looking in a mirror of the same shot and suddenly one of them isn't there, that he doesn't have a reflection, I was like, oh, shit. Okay. That's subtle horror right there. It's like because again, there's no fanfare. There's no music sting. There's no kind of strange effect or cutting back and forth. It's done it's done subtly to make you truly feel disturbed in that moment of like, oh, here's a very normal interaction that isn't actually normal in the slightest. It sneaks up on you, and I love it for that reason.
And that's the thing, is that I like a lot of the intrigue and the mystery that sort of goes on with it. It's funny because the film is classified as a mystery, even though there is no mystery. Like, at least as an audience member, you know what's going on, but it still has that general atmosphere that really lends itself to it. And I mean, we already mentioned it, but Karl Freund, like, the way he can, like,
oh my God, yeah,
frame a shot and shoot things is fantastic. And I mean, this isn't he did the same thing for Metropolis, which we've covered before. Like, yes. Just
which I personally didn't. At the time, for whatever reason, I just didn't click with it as much, but the shot styles were still incredible.
The shot styles and the set design definitely, which I think that might have been F.W. Murnau, maybe did the set design for Metropolis. I don't know who did the set design for Dracula, but regardless, it's very good and it's very well put together, and it's something that you can be extremely engaged with. And as far as the effects go, it really doesn't have to do a lot, and I think a lot of these movies succeed for what they had. Like, just a decade from this movie is when the Wolfman comes out with Claude Rains, and the transformations in that movie, I mean, are they on par with something like what Rick Baker was doing in An American Werewolf in London? Obviously not, but still, it's like, for the time, it's amazing, what they can pull off. And then that's all they do, because it's like, well, you've seen what we have with this, we don't really need to take it any farther. Just let it lie and let it soak in.
And I think that's something that's been lost with modern horror. Like, there's a lot of very incredible good modern horror. I'm not trying to crap on that. Like, I think horror, if anything, has hit, like, in many ways, a light renaissance as of late. Just like a lot of different versions of it. And I think there's been a lot of exploration with the concept. So I'm not saying anything against that. I'm saying there's something that was lost with earlier horror, where a lot of it was the discovery and the slow creeping realization of horror, where you don't necessarily realize anything's wrong until you start looking at the details. Like, obviously everyone knows the story of Jekyll and Hyde. It's, Jekyll and Hyde are the same person, and Jekyll transforms into Hyde. In the original novel, that's not revealed until near the very end. And not only that, there's a very consistent belief, like, Hyde is this evil persona that Dr. Jekyll hates and everything and wishes he didn't do. That's not the case at all. Mr. Hyde is all of the repressed evils and societal a shame that Dr. Jekyll has held in himself, and he willingly creates this potion in order to transform in Hyde so he can express that, so he can stop feeling so repressed in this Victorian world he is in. And he actually fully engages with and wants Hyde to be around until the very end when he starts losing control. It's the realization of, this is a horrible situation, and this guy's wanting it. It's the horror and the propagation of horror that's the biggest part of it. And a lot of modern horror is like a lot of as a result, like with Renfield, where there's the concept of subtlety is long gone. We just kind of lost that edge of that ability to kind of that slow dawning, allowing yourself to be in the same shoes as these people as they're discovering, this man is a vampire. And obviously the audience, even of the time, knew full on, yeah, of course it's a vampire. We've seen everything he's been doing on screen. But these guys weren't there for that scene, and they're able to portray that feeling and replicate it for the audience. That's incredible. just because the audience saw it doesn't mean the feeling can't be recreated of that discovery of, oh, this is bad, oh, this is incredibly bad, and how do we deal with this? And I miss that we don't do that so much anymore. And obviously we still have bits of that. There's still moments of that. I know, we have not lost the concept of subtlety. I know that, but the way of doing it in almost the mundane way that Dracula does, it's refreshing to see. It's just fascinating. All right, I just gushed really hard there.
No, that's fine. I mean, I agree with you in a lot of respects. I'm a big fan, of that style of doing it. So
I've realized as I come to this point in my life, I didn't realize how much I truly actually love horror. I don't necessarily like watching it, but I love the concept and I love the portrayal of it whenever I do. I'm like, it's just fascinating.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm surprised it took me this long to really realize that.
So I personally have been shitting a lot on Renfield. I do want to say that this is also something I've spoke to in the past, but I do think that one of the better aspects of the movie is Nick Cage, because
oh my god,
because the movie itself, and this is something I just complained about as well, where it's like it kind of realizes what it is, but since it's a comedy, it doesn't jive well for me. If it was like a drama or like a sci-fi or something that knew what it was doing, I'd be all in. But since it's a comedy, it feels a bit too tongue-in-cheek for me. That being said, Nick Cage is an actor fully understanding like what the assignment is and what type of movie he's in. Is really just the greatest bit of this, because he's chewing the scenery as best he possibly can in true Nick Cage fashion. And I really do think that that's perfectly encapsulated in the scene where Nick Cage visits Renfield at his home, because, he discovers that Renfield has this apartment that he's renting out and is decorated. And Nick Cage sits down at his kitchen table and is letting Renfield explain himself, and while Renfield's explaining, it cuts to Nick Cage's Dracula character, just with wide eyes and his chin in his hands, just sort of going, and you can tell he's really, like, condescending and like, oozing pretending to care. It's perfect. And that's just, like, the total encapsulation of that character in the movie, and I think that he's really the only thing that consistently works.
Let it never be said that Nick Cage does not put his whole damn heart and soul into his roles when he acts. Like, he will, like, when he's given a character, he, by God, will do the damn character. And I don't think that's ever been... I think people have shat on his performances a lot in the past, but it's like, when you're given the crazy roles he's been given in the past, it's like, yeah, of course he's going to do some crazy fucking performances, and God bless him for doing it. It makes him the most interesting person on screen, regardless of movie, at all times. Like, name a single movie where Nicolas Cage was not the most interesting person on screen when he was a person in that fucking film, even if he wasn't necessarily the main character.
And that's the thing too, is obviously you have to take this with a grain of salt, because Nick Cage is the one who has said it, and we all know that he's had monetary problems. But he's gone on record saying that he doesn't just do every movie that comes across his desk. It may seem like it, but according to him, he reads every script that he's handed, and he only does movies that he actually believes in, for better or worse. And I mean, maybe that's true, maybe that's not, because it really does feel like he's in like 8 movies a year now. But still,
he probably just genuinely enjoys doing it too.
Yeah, I want to believe that with all of my heart, that it isn't just because he owes a bunch of back taxes because he wasted all his money on castles and dinosaur skulls. I really would.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I had the drive of that man, I'd probably be doing a bunch of shit too. It's the fact that he's doing so much now. I think, I think this is just kind of a tangent, but I can't remember the name of the film, but it was the like slasher horror movie that was basically just Five Nights at Freddy's, but before Five Nights at Freddy's got its movie
Willy's
deal.
Wonderland. I watched
Willy's Wonderland, yes. I think the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is not going to come anywhere close to that one, because that one was just, it took the concept and Five Nights is already so fucking played out. Like, I think we all as a society can realize, yeah, we've done everything that can be done with that concept. This movie will add nothing. And I think it was encapsulated for the fact that Willy's Wonderland was already deconstructing the concept before they even got their movie deal. It's, killer mascot characters. Yeah, well, what if this one dude came in and just started wrecking their shit? It's like, okay, this is hilarious. I love it.
And the fact that it's a super serious world that has all this intense lore about these creatures at Willy's Wonderland that need to be fed the souls of whatever. And so all these characters buy into it, but the Nick Cage character is just this guy who literally has no dialogue in the entire movie, just walks around killing these he just goes around killing these things, but he's got to have his breaks. So he's literally in the middle of saving teenagers from this animatronic beast, and his alarm goes off, he stops saving them, walks away while they're still in danger, and he plays pinball and eats pizza for like 30 minutes.
Which I'm just gonna say it. Autistic icon. Just gonna say it. Nonverbal, extremely rigorous scheduling. I love it. Like full dedication to his craft.
I really did like that movie.
I think that movie cannot be overrated. Frankly, I think it's one of his best works. And I do again. I love like you're saying, like it has all this super edgy, serious lore about it and everything. Which is it is Five Nights at Freddy's, and then this is basically just the Five Nights at Freddy's Predator movie equivalent. Just Nick Cage is playing the Predator. It's so good. I adore it so much, and he is the best part of that. And this has fully been completely tangential to what we were talking about ultimately, but
we're gushing about Nick Cage.
Yeah, like it's us noting the fact that yes, the best part of Renfield is Nick Cage by a wide margin. I think him playing Dracula. I think his portrayal of Dracula is probably the most realistic outcome to if the eccentric Bela Lugosi Dracula just kept on going and kept getting everything he wanted. Yeah, I feel like he'd just be this wacky character by the end.
That movie sort of begs the question why Dracula hadn't gotten more thralls to do his bidding for him sooner.
Yeah, I think just like...
Because he clearly has the power to do so.
I feel like once we start poking at the holes in this, I feel like we're going to realize there's more hole than sweater. So I feel like it's just because the plot demanded it.
Also, something about Renfield, I got to come up with another positive. This isn't necessarily a positive for like the structure, the making of the movie, really, but something that was genuinely refreshing to come out of a horror movie, even if it's a horror comedy, is the fact that everyone just fully buys into the Dracula stuff immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's some pushback on it, but, like, Renfield tells Awkwafina that he, like, works for serving Dracula. She laughs a little bit, but then she's fully like, you serve the Dracula? So, like, everyone knows that Dracula's a real thing. Like, Ben Schwartz approaches his mother, who's the head of this crime gang, and he's like, we got Dracula's coffin. And she's like, the Dracula's coffin? Really? Like, everyone just fully is like, this is a real creature that we're all aware of.
Yeah. Like, it tells me that vampires, like, if we're going with the lore, I'm sure, Abraham Van Helsing, if he survived in this universe, he probably published some papers about vampirism. And so there's probably, like, it's probably like a, one of those underknown things of like, oh, by the way, vampirism is actually a real thing. But, like, is barely present in people's lives. But it's just present enough that it's like, oh, actual Dracula. That's incredible. It's like, that's... Yeah. I like the idea that, again, like I said at the top of this version of New Orleans and probably this whole world is basically just Gotham. It's just everything is like nothing is too crazy. Like there's everything going on here is like, all right, they learned some new bullshit thing and they're like, all right, whatever, it may as well happen.
That's definitely a positive takeaway I had. It's very reminiscent of how I felt with Death Takes a Holiday from earlier this year, where the guy's just like, it's Death visiting and he's on holiday, and the crowd just gasps and the one woman's like, oh my lord, like everyone just immediately buys into it, and there's not the standard stock like, you're pulling my leg, there's no such thing, like, which is so unbelievably common, and we, in a world that we live in where people are ready to believe in anything, I don't think that is believable anymore, people being shocked at things like that.
Yeah, truly, like, this may as well happen. It's like,
yeah.
If someone just came down, if God Almighty came down from on high, I feel like the reaction would be just kind of mixed. It's be like, really?
Yeah.
All this time? Oh man, I would not live to regret those words. Yeah. I don't know how I could, quite frankly, but
God's favorite podcast, maybe.
I mean, I don't want to insult God, but I feel like he needs to like expand his tastes. I also don't want to insult our podcast. Actually, I should say that as well. I will say though, I don't think we're worthy of that title. I think we're good. I don't think we're that good.
Fair enough. Yeah, we're being too lofty with our ideals.
I don't necessarily need to set up that hubristic fall. I've read the Odyssey more than once. Like, I get it.
More than once? Oh my god, that's a tome.
I mean, like, the first time I read it, it was in school, and I fucking hated it. And the second time, it was more like I kind of read most of it in college again. And I was like, yeah, this is interesting. I like the Greek stories. We are fully waffling at this point. It's kind of we kind of made our opinions on these movies pretty well clear. I should say.
Yeah, I don't like Renfield really at all. There's a few things that I think stand out about it, but they do not improve my enjoyment of the movie. Todd Browning's Dracula is amazing.
It's incredible. It is an icon for a reason. It's at first I was fully ready to write it off as like, okay, this is kind of an overrated thing. Like, it hasn't aged well. And then by the maybe a fifth of the way through, I was like, this is fucking incredible. I never want to stop watching this. It's only like an hour and 20 minutes. And yeah, Renfield, I don't actively dislike Renfield. I think it's silly. I think it's stupid. I think just the concept they've run with is like, you know what, fine. That's a fair enough concept as any. But we have seen worse remakes and worse sequels. I will say there have been worse situations that we have had to deal with, and so I think this one's just like I knew not to take it too seriously going into it, and you know what? It wasn't serious at all, and yeah, I don't think it did anything like abjectly horrible. So there's nothing, I'm not gonna, go all The Departed on it. But yeah, no, it's still not amazing. It's still not great. I might watch it again if it were on TV. I'd just be like, all right, this is silly and stupid. Let's go for it.
You know what?
I want to see Sonic the Hedgehog be a douchebag. Weird to think about.
He's just playing his Parks and Rec character, really.
Yeah, fair. If his Parks and Rec character was just like slightly more unhinged.
Yeah.
I mean, slightly.
Oh.
Yeah,
well, we've made our thoughts well known. So let's step into a brief question real quick. I'm going to keep this up as long as we can. This is only the second one, but still, I like the concept. So, as we see with Renfield here, it's fairly easy to grasp onto people's nostalgia by just generating a movie or another piece of media that's based on an underrepresented character from the original work. So my question is, if you had to make a movie sequel that focused on a secondary character, what would it be?
I was going to say Igor, but there is a CG animated movie about Igor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, shit.
I think that I really want to focus on that. Yeah, I really want to focus on that radio show host that John Candy plays in Little Shop of Horrors. What's his day like?
Oh man,
what's he doing?
I want to follow the day-to-day life of a Gotham resident. I want to see what they go through on a daily basis, because that bullshit is wild. That feels like an obvious answer, but I think it would be hilarious.
I could see that. That feels like a bottle episode that one of the animated series would have done by now, but I don't think I've seen that. So
I don't think so. No, which is surprising. I've seen people do like bits of that on like YouTube or TikTok or whatever, of like what it's like to be an average citizen in a comic book city. But I'd love to genuinely just see like if they just went with that. And I'm trying to think of another character like outside of like a superhero movie or something, because that feels obvious. You can cut the silence if I come up with an answer. If not, I can just cut to me going, I don't know.
No, that's okay.
Oh shit. Oh, there's a character in Oh Brother Where Art Thou. He's played by John Goodman. He's the one-eyed like Bible salesman. I want to see his origins. I think he is an absurd character. Like, just everything about him. I'm just like, I need to know more about this big talking KKK member. I just think there is no way his background is not the most fuck wild shit.
Oh, that's a great one, I think.
Yeah. How did he lose his eye?
I'd watch that.
Give me the Nick Fury story of the guy of the Bible salesman from Oh Brother Where Art Thou.
You think we can get the Coen brothers back together for that?
Which I'm realizing,
maybe we'll just have to settle on Ethan.
What I'm realizing would just be them, like, because Oh Brother Where Art Thou was just like a reinterpretation of the Odyssey. I guess that would just be a prequel to that. Would just be a reinterpretation of the Iliad.
Yes.
So you know what? I'd love to see that.
The events that lead up to it. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Yeah, I think that's my final answer of where the John Goodman character from Oh Brother Where Art Thou came from.
You heard it here, folks. John Goodman and John Candy, starring in movies soon. One of them's not with us anymore, but
next we'll get like John Leguizamo or something.
Oh yeah.
There's a whole collection of Johns.
John Hurt.
I'm sorry to hear that, John.
Oh well, too bad. Okay, but I think now we have to do
socials.
Oh god, we can't recover from that.
I'll show myself out and continue with socials.
Okay, go ahead and subscribe to us on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. Leave a like, review, favorite, comment. It can only help. We're on things like Apple Podcasts, Google, Spreaker, Podbay, Podomatic, iHeartRadio, all the things like that. YouTube, which we're on now. We're hosted by Spotify for podcasters, though. Go ahead and send us an email, theyremadeit@gmail.com, with suggestions for future episodes if you want. We're always willing to read those. Things you like about the show, things you hate about the show. Good things all around to be sending through emails.
We love validation.
Yeah, always. I crave it. And yeah, speaking of craving validation, go follow us on social media. We're at It Remade on Twitter/X. And you can follow us, subscribe and follow us there for updates on when future episodes are going live, posters and documents outlining things that we've been talking about. on the podcast, such as what we have been watching or playing or potentially reading, and episodes we may cover in the future, and full circle diagrams I've been putting together for people we've covered on the show more than once. And that is it for socials.
Oh, fantastic. I'd like to apologize for my John Hurt pun. I believe I've acted in enough penance by now.
This is your official apology video.
Oh, Christ.
Going out to the world.
I'm trying to think what I would ever even get into that would warrant an apology video.
That's a dangerous, slippery slope there.
It'd probably be something like if eventually, like, Scorsese finally found my very divisive opinions about The Departed. In which case, Mr. Scorsese, if you're listening, fuck you. That movie sucks. I will stand. I will die on this hill.
I mean, I kind of agree. I kind of want to revisit it because I remember disliking it, but I think I've got swept up into the hate. I'm like, do I hate it or am I just not a fan? I don't remember. It's been too long, but I don't know.
I'm gonna do what a fundamentalist would do, and that is not actually confront my biases and just keep spiraling into it until I die.
That's healthy.
Ooh.
I'll apologize on the behalf of just the podcast in general, Mr. Scorsese. I'm looking forward to Flowers of the August Moon or whatever that horse shit's called. So,
man, we're really deciding just like at the end of this, just like, hey, Scorsese, whatever, man. You've been told off by two jack-offs. How do you feel?
I am actually looking forward to that movie. The poster sucks though.
Oh
what
my
else
God.
Is new? Movie posters blow. Startling revelation.
Well, I think I'd say we've dug this hole deep enough. What do you say we start climbing the walls? As always, I am your host, Stuart.
And I'm your host, Jacob.
Mr. Scorsese, I respect you, but really, the rat on the railing?
It's symbolic!
Oh, God. Have a good night, everybody.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.